On a bright spring morning in 1999, Britain's most beloved television presenter stepped out of her car, walked toward her front door, and into the last 60 seconds of her life. Jill Dando was the face of the BBC, a woman whose warm smile had become a fixture in millions of British homes. At 37, she had everything: a glittering career hosting Crimewatch, the nation's most watched crime appeal show, a recent engagement to gynecologist Alan Farthing, and a future that seemed limitless. She was the kind of person strangers felt they knew, the kind of celebrity who made you believe fame could be kind. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her voice measured and reassuring as she guided viewers through the darkest stories Britain had to offer. She specialized in tragedy, in unsolved murders and desperate families, never knowing she would soon become the story she'd spent years telling. April 26, 1999, 11:30 in the morning. The neighborhood of Gowan Avenue in Fulham was quiet, lined with elegant Victorian houses and the gentle rustle of spring leaves. Jill had spent the night at her fiancé's home in Chiswick and was stopping by her own house to collect mail and faxes. She parked her blue BMW convertible outside number 29, a house she'd owned for years but rarely stayed in anymore. Security cameras would later show her walking alone up the path, fumbling with her keys. She was on the doorstep, the key entering the lock, when someone approached from behind. A single gunshot, one bullet to the left temple, fired at point-blank range. The weapon pressed so close to her head that it left a circular imprint on her skin. Jill Dando collapsed on her own doorstep, her shopping bags scattering around her, blood pooling beneath her face. The killer vanished into the late morning streets like smoke, leaving behind a silence so profound that neighbors didn't even realize what had happened. It was only when a passerby noticed her body 15 minutes later that the screaming began. Britain went into shock. This wasn't a random mugging gone wrong or a domestic dispute turned fatal. This was an execution. The country's sweetheart, gunned down in broad daylight on one of London's safest streets. The Metropolitan Police launched the largest murder investigation since the Yorkshire Ripper, assigning over 50 detectives to the case. They interviewed thousands of witnesses, collected forensic evidence, and pursued every lead with the intensity of a nation demanding answers. But nothing made sense. Jill had no enemies. She wasn't involved in drugs, didn't owe money, had no jilted lovers or bitter rivals. She was, by every account, genuinely beloved. The theories came fast and vicious. Was it the Serbian mafia, retaliating against her for a Crimewatch appeal about war crimes? Had she been killed by a pedophile ring furious over her work exposing child abuse? Was it a professional hit, a contract killing ordered by someone with deep pockets and darker motives? The single bullet recovered from the scene was from a rare 9mm short cartridge, the kind used in vintage pistols that were nearly impossible to trace. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They'd chosen a weapon that would disappear into history, a ghost gun wielded by a phantom. For a year, the investigation spiraled in every direction and arrived nowhere. Then, in May 2000, detectives arrested a local man named Barry George. He lived half a mile from Jill's house, a loner in his late 30s with a history of stalking women and an obsession with firearms. His flat was a disturbing shrine to violence, walls plastered with pictures of guns, military gear scattered across the floor, and a bizarre fixation on celebrities. He'd been seen near Gowan Avenue on the morning of the murder, wearing a dark coat and acting strangely. Most damning of all, forensic scientists found a single particle of firearms discharge residue in the pocket of his coat. It was microscopic, barely there, but it was enough. The prosecution built their case like a tower of cards, each piece seemingly solid but resting on the one beneath. Barry George was a fantasist, they argued, a man who craved notoriety and had finally acted on his darkest impulses. He'd stalked Jill, learned her routine, and waited for the perfect moment. The residue in his pocket proved he'd fired a gun recently. His silence during police interviews wasn't innocence, it was guilt. In July 2001, the jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a verdict: guilty of murder. Barry George was sentenced to life in prison, and Britton exhaled. But the exhale was premature. Almost immediately, cracks appeared in the prosecution's case. The firearms residue particle was so small it could have come from anywhere. Contamination in the lab, transfer from a police officer, even innocent contact with the surface where someone had handled a gun weeks earlier. There was no murder weapon, no DNA, no fingerprints, no witnesses who could definitively place George at the scene. His supposed stalking of Jill was circumstantial at best, and his strange behavior was just that. Strange, not criminal. Defense lawyers began filing appeals, each one chipping away at the evidence that had convicted him. In 2007, the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial. New forensic testimony revealed that the single particle of residue was essentially meaningless, that it proved nothing about George's involvement in the murder. In August 2008, a second jury heard the case again, this time with the microscopic evidence exposed for what it was: a fragment of hope clinging to a case with no foundation. After 2 days of deliberation, they returned a different verdict: not guilty. Barry George walked out of court a free man after 8 years behind bars, his life shattered, but his innocence restored. The murder of Jill Dando remains unsolved. The killer has never been found, never been identified, never faced justice. The single bullet that ended her life came from a weapon that vanished without a trace, fired by hands that were never photographed, never fingerprinted, never brought into the light. Theories still swirl in the dark corners of true crime forums and late-night documentaries: professional assassin, obsessed fan, random psychopath choosing the wrong victim at the wrong time. But none of them have answers. None of them can explain why a woman who dedicated her life to solving crimes became the one case that would never close. Jill Dando's grave sits in a quiet cemetery in Weston-super-Mare, her hometown, marked by flowers that still appear decades later from people who never knew her but can't forget her. Her fiancé married someone else, moved on, built a new life. The house on Gowan Avenue was sold and resold, its doorstep scrubbed clean of blood but never truly free of what happened there. And somewhere, perhaps living an ordinary life, perhaps dead themselves by now, the person who pulled the trigger remains a ghost, a question mark, a shadow that Britain has never been able to chase into the light. The most terrifying crime isn't always the one with the most blood. It's the one that makes you realize that sometimes evil simply walks away. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.